Since Russia's invasion in early 2022, Ukraine has seen the emergence of a growing domestic drone program. Now, this program has led to the development of various attack and reconnaissance drones, including the significant role played by the Shark drone in combat.
As well as looking mean, this new drone gives Ukrainian forces a cutting edge to find enemy positions. Attached with a powerful zoom camera, the Shark drone can make out text while flying more than a mile above ground. Here's drone pilot Soliara.
I basically say that the Shark drone is the iPhone among drones of this type. Firstly, it is very easy to maintain, very easy to manage, and errors that may occur due to human factors are eliminated by control mechanisms in both software and hardware. We are basically flying without losses.
Field teams can pinpoint coordinates of targets for artillery units to attack from a safer distance in a control van. Artillery dominates the battlefield in this war, and thousands of shells are fired by Ukrainian and Russian forces every day. Soldier Kenobi explains the success they've had.
About a month after I started working with the Sharks, we found an air defence complex. We struck it, and it was very spectacular. Yes, this is what I remember the most.
Ukraine's domestic drone program has soared since Russia invaded in early 2022, producing a range of attack and reconnaissance UAVs that have played an increasingly important role in battle along front lines stretching over 600 miles. One Shark costs only $50,000 to make, and local manufacturing means they're easy to repair.
It's quite resistant to electronic warfare. This has been tested many times. The technology behind returning it home is very well thought out because it can work without GPS at all. The fact that the Russians are trying to jam GPS signals, well, we don't give a hoot.
Well, shifting our focus to Pakistan, where in a dramatic turn of events, thousands of people got flooded in Pakistan's main northwestern border crossing as they desperately seek to cross into Afghanistan.
Pakistan's border was swamped with thousands of people seeking to cross into Afghanistan on Thursday, a day after the government's deadline passed for undocumented foreigners to leave or face expulsion.
We don't want to go to Afghanistan, but these people are not allowing us to stay. My family has been living here for 50 years, but now they are not allowing them to stay.
These people are being very cruel to us. If they'd given us 4 or 5 months more, we could have spent the winter here in comfort. Then, God willing, we would have gone back to our country.
Pakistani authorities began rounding up undocumented foreigners hours before the deadline. More than 1 million Afghans could have to leave or face arrest and forcible expulsion as a result of the ultimatum delivered by the Pakistan government a month ago. The government has brushed off calls from the United Nations, rights groups, and Western embassies to reconsider its expulsion plan. It says Afghans have been involved in Islamist militant attacks and in crime that undermine the security of the country.
The situation at the border points at the moment is completely overwhelming.
Becky Robbie is advocacy manager for the Norwegian Refugee Council.
We're seeing somewhere between 9,000 and 10,000 people between both border points crossing on a daily basis. And when people reach the border point, normally they have been traveling already for several days. They've been sleeping out in the open. In many cases, they've had to sell their personal belongings to pay for the transport. They've often left in a very hurried circumstance.
Of the more than 4 million Afghans living in Pakistan, the government estimates 1.7 million are undocumented. Many fled during the decades of armed conflict in Afghanistan, while the Taliban's takeover after the withdrawal of U.S.-led coalition forces in 2021 led to another exodus. Aid agencies warn that the mass movement of people could tip Afghanistan into yet another crisis and have expressed grave concerns about the survival and reintegration of the returnees, particularly with the onset of winter.
And moving on, the Japanese government will spend over $113 billion on a package of measures to cushion the economic blow from inflation, which will include tax cuts. Now, the government projects the spending plan will boost Japan's GDP by around 1.2% on average over the next 3 years.
Japan unveiled major measures to help ease the pain of inflation on Thursday. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida set out the plans. He said the package would total around $113 billion. It includes temporary cuts to income and residential taxes. Tokyo will also give payouts to low-income households and subsidies to curb gasoline and utility bills.
By putting together income tax cuts and wage hikes next summer, I want to ensure a situation where growth in household income exceeds the pace of inflation.
The government projects the spending plan will boost Japan's GDP by around 1.2% on average over the next 3 years. It said gasoline and utility subsidies will help push down overall consumer inflation by about 1 percentage point. Inflation has hurt Japan's economy and stayed above the central bank's target of 2% for more than a year. But some analysts doubt whether the tax cuts and payouts will help boost consumption and economic growth. One former Bank of Japan board member expects the measures to lift GDP by just 0.19% for the year. Other market watchers believe Thursday's measures could worsen the country's already stretched finances. The spending may force the government to issue more bonds, adding to Japan's public debt, which is the biggest among major economies.
Meanwhile, Lufthansa reported quarterly profits slightly above analysts' consensus on the back of robust travel demand this summer, and has said that bookings remain strong ahead of the busy Christmas holiday season as well. Take a look.
Lufthansa shares soared 7% on Thursday morning. Investors were pleased to hear the German airline report quarterly profits that beat estimates. Third quarter adjusted earnings before interest and tax of $1.56 billion were up almost a third on the year, and Lufthansa is feeling good about the future too. It said bookings for the fourth quarter were up by double-digit percentages on the year, and the group expects to post a positive operating result for the period. Many European carriers have seen strong demand as consumers travelled through a cost of living crisis. But while the summer was positive, the outlook is more clouded for a lot of airlines. Rising oil prices due to the conflict in the Middle East and risks of recession have made investors wary and hit share prices. Lufthansa said the geopolitical situation was challenging, but said the outlook was positive for group results this year and beyond.
And next up, Donald Trump's son, Donald Trump Jr., recently testified in a trial that might cause some trouble for his father and former US president's business. Trump Jr. basically said he didn't have much to do with the financial documents in the family's real estate company. It's a big legal showdown that could affect the former president's business empire.
Donald Trump Jr. took the witness stand in the civil fraud trial against his father's business empire on Wednesday. He told a Manhattan court that he had little to do with financial practices that are at the heart of the case. His father, former U.S. President Donald Trump, and his family businesses are accused of inflating asset values to dupe lenders and insurers. Donald Jr., an executive vice president at the Trump Organization and a co-defendant in the case, is the first of Trump's adult children to testify, followed by Eric and Ivanka Trump. Their father is set to testify on Monday. Donald Jr. said he and Eric largely took over management of the company when their father assumed the presidency in 2017. His testimony could continue into Thursday and be another flashpoint in a trial punctuated by sharp exchanges between lawyers and witnesses and heated arguments over the admissibility of evidence. The lawsuit by Democratic New York Attorney General Letitia James accuses Trump, his two adult sons, and a handful of their family businesses of inflating their assets by billions of dollars to secure better loan terms. Trump has denied wrongdoing and has repeatedly accused James and the judge of political bias. James is seeking at least $250 million in fines, a permanent ban against Trump and his 2 adult sons from running businesses in New York, and a 5-year commercial real estate ban against Trump and the Trump Organization.
And take a look at this. Renewable energy company Ørsted has announced that it has stopped the progress of 2 offshore wind projects in the United States. They also mentioned that the associated financial losses have exceeded $5 billion.
The offshore wind power industry in the US faces choppy waters. On Wednesday, leading developer Ørsted said it was cancelling 2 major projects off the coast of New Jersey. It's taking a big financial hit over the move, with estimates nudging as high as $5.6 billion. Offshore wind is a big part of Washington's efforts to phase out fossil fuels for energy production. US President Joe Biden identified it as a major plank of his Inflation Reduction Act.
This new law also provides tax credits that's going to create tens of thousands of good-paying jobs, and clean energy manufacturing jobs, solar factories in the Midwest and the South, wind farms across the plains and off our shores, clean hydrogen projects, and more all across America, every part of America.
But analysts say the offshore wind sector faces a perfect storm of troubles. Rising inflation, interest rate hikes, and supply chain delays have conspired to slow down new projects and make them more expensive. Danish firm Ørsted, the world's biggest offshore wind developer, had said back in August that such factors would cost it billions in impairments. Now it's gone a step further, cancelling the 2 major projects, dubbed Ocean Wind 1 and 2. Developers have said that the electricity prices on offer at recent auctions have been too low to make starting on other wind farms viable. On Wednesday, the White House said it remained committed to offshore wind, pointing to the billions of dollars of incentives provided by the Inflation Reduction Act.
And moving on, Boeing, the company, is investigating a potential cyber attack and dealing with a ransom demand as it works with law enforcement agencies. An apparent attack targeted its parts and distribution business, and the cybercrime group Lockbit claimed to have stolen sensitive data.
Boeing is investigating a cyber incident and faces a ransom demand. The aerospace and defence giant said Wednesday it was working with law enforcement following an apparent attack on its parts and distribution business. Days earlier, a cybercrime gang calling itself Lockbit said it had stolen a tremendous amount of sensitive data from the firm. It said it would dump the data online if Boeing didn't pay a ransom by Thursday. The demand later disappeared from the gang's website, and the plane maker wouldn't say if Lockbit was behind the cyber incident. Boeing said flight safety was not affected in any way. It did not disclose whether any defense-related data had been compromised. US watchdogs say Lockbit was the most active global ransomware group last year. It has reportedly hit 1,700 US organizations since 2020. The gang typically uses software to lock up a target firm's systems or steals sensitive data to use for extortion. Cyber experts say even paying the ransom demand would not guarantee that Lockbit actually returned or deleted the stolen data.
Meanwhile, survivors of colonial era in Kenya have voiced criticism against UK's King Charles, stating that his expression of deepest regret for what he called abhorrent and unjustifiable acts of violence falls short of their expectations. Take a look at this next report.
Britain's King Charles may have expressed his deepest regret for colonial-era abuses in Kenya, but for some, it's not enough. Gideon Mungai was an underground operative during the 1952 to 1960 Mau Mau revolt, which was brutally put down by British colonial forces.
His expression of regret, without apologizing, means he is still holding back. Let him withhold whatever it is. his government tortured us.
Some 90,000 Kenyans were killed or maimed in the period known as the emergency, according to the Kenya Human Rights Commission. 160,000 were detained, with many subjected to torture. Mungai and other survivors have criticized Charles's failure to issue a full apology or propose reparations.
What would make me even happier in my old age is the return of the grabbed land. I may not be able to benefit from it, but my descendants will be proud of our struggle.
United Nations investigators have also said that British colonialists committed gross human rights violations against hundreds of thousands of people in Western Kenya over decades. That included land expropriation, killings, and sexual violence. In downtown Nairobi on Wednesday, resident Nicholas Mwangai said Kenya still bears the scars.
Him saying the only regret and not offering an official apology goes a long way to show that they hardly acknowledge the kind of past the British monarch and colonialism has caused this country. And the consequence of colonialism continue to shape our lives today.
Charles expressed his regret during a state dinner on Tuesday, in which he described colonial-era abuses as abhorrent and unjustifiable acts of violence. The UK agreed to pay a $24 million settlement in 2013 to more than 5,200 survivors of abuses during the emergency. But it has refused to issue an apology and has rebuffed claims by other communities. Paul Muite, a senior Kenyan lawyer who represented Mau Mau veterans in the 2013 case, said there were more than 2,000 additional victims of abuses during the emergency who did not receive compensation. The royal visit also comes at a time when Britain is under pressure to do more to recognize colonial-era abuses. Some, notably Barbados and Jamaica, have been re-evaluating their ties to the monarchy. In Kenya on Tuesday, President William Ruto praised what he called a highly encouraging first step to go beyond the tentative and equivocal half measures of past years. But for some in Kenya, and indeed across other former colonies, the UK is not yet doing enough.
And moving on, Germany is speeding up deportation of rejected asylum seekers. The number of refugees is on the rise, and Germany's government is under immense pressure to tighten asylum rules. Rights groups, on the other hand, have criticized the measures now approved not only as too severe and unlikely to have any meaningful effect on the ground.
Interior Minister Nancy Faeser has taken the next step toward her goal of toughening Germany's immigration rules. Her new draft bill approved on Wednesday seeks to make it easier and faster to deport people who are still in the country despite not having the legal right to stay. For example, because their asylum request was rejected. The feeling in the government is that the current system desperately needs work and is an added burden to Germany's overwhelmed immigration system. Last year, authorities failed to carry out 2/3 of the around 36,000 planned deportations.
In order to protect the fundamental right to asylum, we must significantly limit irregular migration. Those who don't have the right to stay must leave our country. The number of repatriations this year is already around 27% higher than the same period last year, but there is still an urgent need for action.
People can currently be held in pre-deportation custody for up to 10 days. The plan is to extend this to 28 days to allow authorities more time to prepare. Police would also have greater access to a person's accommodation or phone, making it easier to confirm their identity and carry out the deportation. The government also wants to accelerate the expulsion of convicted smugglers. And possibly the most controversial proposal, members of organized crime groups could be deported even if they have not been convicted of a crime, as already occurs for members of terrorist groups. Experts question whether the measures will actually have an effect.
They likely increase deportations a bit, but I think it's not going to be a game changer because, like I said, the main reason why deportations fail is the lack of cooperations with countries of origins and the absence of legal documents. And here, it's harder to make big changes.
Parts of the governing coalition, like some members of the Green Party, but especially migrant and refugee organizations, see the proposed changes as being too severe. They ask whether the measures would even be legal, saying they are at least legally questionable, if not unconstitutional.
Well, now, Switzerland has amended blood donation criteria for men who have sexual relations with other men, making ineligibility criteria the same for homosexuals and heterosexuals. Until 2017, gay men were systematically barred from giving blood in Switzerland.
Gabriel de la Bay is one of the first gay men in Switzerland to give blood without extra restrictions on Wednesday. Switzerland amended blood donation criteria for men who have sexual relations with other men, making ineligibility criteria the same for homosexuals and heterosexuals.
It's a small page in a history book that says on November 1st, 2023, Switzerland allowed homosexuals to donate their blood more easily. I don't think we should think only as a community, but it's good to break barriers and to promote the right things to do.
Until 2017, gay men were systematically barred from giving blood in Switzerland. It was a policy dating back to the start of the HIV/AIDS epidemic in the 1980s. Since then, men sexually active with other men were allowed to donate blood only if 12 months had passed since their last homosexual encounter. Now, under the new restrictions, a 4-month waiting period applies to all people after their last sexual encounter with a new partner, or a 12-month waiting period if sexual contacts have taken place with more than 2 partners within the last 4 months. Some other European countries have no restrictions preventing men who have sexual relations with men from giving blood. France removed additional restrictions on gay blood donors last year.
Well, next up, China has agreed to work with the United States, the European Union, and other countries to collectively manage the risk from artificial intelligence at a British summit aimed at charting a safe way forward for the rapidly evolving technology.
And here we are for the first time, really in human history, with something that's going to be far more intelligent than us.
Elon Musk expressed grave concern about the rapid development of artificial intelligence on Wednesday at the world's first major summit on AI safety.
It's one of the existential risks that we face, and it's potentially the most pressing one.
Musk said the aim of the inaugural 2-day summit was to establish what he called a third-party referee to observe AI development and to sound the alarm if needed. Fears about the impact AI could have on economies and society took off last year when Microsoft-backed OpenAI made ChatGPT available to the public. Some worry that in time, machines could achieve greater intelligence than humans, resulting in unintended consequences. In a first for Western efforts to manage the dangers, China's Vice Minister of Science and Technology joined US and EU leaders, as well as tech bosses, at England's Bletchley Park, home of Britain's World War II codebreakers. It was here the country signed the Bletchley Declaration, an agenda focused on identifying issues with AI and developing policies to mitigate them.
I firmly believe that we must be guided by a common set of understandings among nations.
In a speech at the U.S. Embassy in London, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris called for urgent global action to address potential threats posed by AI.
From AI-enabled cyber attacks at a scale beyond anything we've seen before, to AI-formulated bioweapons that could endanger the lives of millions of people. These threats are often referred to as the existential threats of AI. because, of course, they could endanger the very existence of humanity.
The United States used the British summit to announce it would establish a new AI Safety Institute, which will assess potential risks. Harris's decision to give her speech and hold some meetings with attendees away from the summit raised some eyebrows, with some executives and lawmakers suggesting Washington was trying to overshadow Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's summit. British officials denied that, saying they wanted as many voices as possible. And later in the day, Sunak welcomed Harris to 10 Downing Street for dinner. She plans to attend the British summit on Thursday.
But expanding on that artificial intelligence segment, from how AI created a new track from the Beatles to big worries over bots on both sides of the Atlantic, we round up the week's big stories from the artificial intelligence revolution.
From why there's a new track from the Beatles to how Joe Biden wants to save the world from chatbots, this is Generation AI. AI is bringing the Beatles back together. Universal Music says a new track from the Fab Four will be released this week. Now and Then comes from an old demo tape made by John Lennon. Before AI came along, it hadn't been possible to separate his vocals and piano well enough to finish the song. Apple unveiled its latest chips, and it's making big claims.
They're the most advanced chips ever created for a personal computer.
Chief Executive Tim Cook says the top-spec M3 Max model is specifically aimed at AI developers who need huge amounts of memory to build chatbots. There were conflicting fortunes elsewhere in Silicon Valley. Microsoft shares jumped after it said demand for AI services helped drive a boom at its cloud computing unit. But growth sagged at the cloud division of Google parent Alphabet, raising investor concern that it's losing out to the Windows maker. Joe Biden is trying to reduce the risks posed by AI. The US president signed an executive order requiring developers to share results of safety tests with the government. That's a step beyond voluntary commitments made by tech firms earlier in the year. And politicians, academics, and corporate leaders gathered Wednesday in the UK for a summit on the same subject. Britain's King Charles recorded some opening remarks for the event.
AI continues to advance with ever greater speed towards models that some predict could surpass human abilities, even human understanding.
Elon Musk and OpenAI boss Sam Altman were among those on the guest list, alongside US Vice President Kamala Harris. But skeptics wonder how much influence London can wield when the US, EU, and China are setting the pace.
And even as we're wrapping the week up, let's also take a look at how Latin America has been celebrating the Day of the Dead. The annual festival commemorates the dead and celebrates the continuity of life. In Cuba, local and Mexican artists brought skeletons to life during a vibrant parade. There was also an altar dedicated to prominent Cuban and Mexican figures.
In Mexico, the Day of the Dead is a reminder of the people who the living have spent time with, who were part of their lives. It is important for Mexican culture and for Mexican families. I think that we Cubans relate to it through the African religions, because in a way they're related to death through gods that are with us. As good Cubans, it is part of our culture and idiosyncrasy.
Tenemos la representación en el pan.
The bread of the Tantawawa represents the deceased, and in the offering we put their bodies, which is the bread, hoping that the soul will recognize their body and try to come back to us and visit us. That means that a very dear person is visiting us, and that he was a very important person among us.
Seguramente una persona importante entre nosotros.
And coming up next, the harrowing story of 22-year-old Maria del Rosario Saravia, who has been anxiously waiting for news of her missing family since the devastating Category 5 hurricane Otis that struck Acapulco. Now, the record-breaking storm ripped apart homes and businesses and left the nearly 9 lakh residents of Acapulco in the dark.
22-year-old Maria del Rosario Saravia comes to wait at this dock every day for news of her mother, 2 brothers, and 4-year-old son, since she lost touch with them a week ago when the Category 5 hurricane Otis struck the Mexican city of Acapulco.
Apparently, they stayed there on the boat at 11:40 p.m. I spoke to my mother, and she told me that they were fine. Then I couldn't communicate with her anymore. I lost signal. I can't communicate with her anymore. To this day, I have not been able to communicate with any of them. It was the last day I saw them, and I hope to see them again soon.
She says her mother, younger brother, and son were with her father, a fisherman, on his boat when the storm hit. Her elder brother, a boat captain, was on a separate boat, which has been missing since the storm. Saravia says her relatives were ordered by their bosses to look after the boats through the storm. Her father is the only one she has seen since.
They sank over there. My father was shipwrecked all night, but he doesn't know where my mother, my brother, and my baby are. He says they were with him, but the pressure of the water and the force of the air took them away. So we have been here since the first day looking for them, but we haven't heard from any of them. Nor have we had any support from any authority, government, or my father's employer.
Authorities say Otis was the most powerful storm to ever strike Mexico's Pacific coast. The record-breaking storm ripped apart homes and businesses and left the nearly 900,000 residents of Acapulco in the dark. At least 50 people were killed in the storm, and there is fear more bodies were swept out to sea, with the search effort ongoing. Help, divers, please help, the sign reads. Acapulco authorities have given few details on the dead and injured, but the state government says dozens are still missing. It's not clear if Saravia's family members are included in the tally. Mexico's government on Wednesday announced a $3.4 billion recovery plan for the battered city. But as many Acapulco residents begin to rebuild, Saravia says she will remain camped at the dock until she has answers.
We'll be here until we found our relatives. I can't say tomorrow we won't come because we don't know when we will find them. We'll be here until we find them.
And another story about climate change. Because using large drones and millions of seeds, UAE's energy company, Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, is hoping to accelerate its afforestation program in Abu Dhabi. Now, UAE aims to work on reaching its 2030 target of planting 10 million mangrove seedlings.
Using large drones and millions of seeds, an Abu Dhabi energy company is hoping to speed up its forestation program. As part of its ambitious fight against climate change, the UAE plans to plant 10 million mangrove seedlings by 2030. The Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, or ADNOC, is working alongside UAE-based environmental tech company Distant Imagery. Using drone planting technology adopted by the Abu Dhabi Environment Agency, they began planting 2.5 million mangrove seedlings. Ibrahim Al-Zubi is the Group Chief Sustainability Officer at ADNOC.
With the drones, we managed to survey areas that we couldn't reach,
We managed to survey areas that we knew we could put mangroves there and we did not know before. We reduced the human error. We lowered cost, but most importantly as well, we found out that the success rates using drones is almost the same as success rates using conventional, traditional planting, which will take more time and effort and funds as well.
However, only 40% of the planted seeds survive and grow into seedlings, according to the co-owner of Distant Imagery, Jane Glavan.
So we have a 40% success rate, 40 to 44% success rate. And really what happens so that ADNOC can successfully have 2.5 million seedlings growing is that we replenish the following year. So we take that data from the first year and then we go back to the field and we replenish in the areas that were most successful. And from that we go out and monitor 2 more times.
According to the UN Environment Programme, global mangrove forests in 2020 had declined by 3.4% since 1966. But stabilised in recent years. In the Gulf country, the number of mangroves has reached 60 million over 70 square miles. The UN also said the success rate of artificial mangrove restoration projects can be quite low. Older mangroves store more carbon than newer ones. But the Climate Ministry in the Gulf country said the mangroves capture 43,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide annually.
So we really plant in following the focus, trying to replicate nature as close as possible. And by replicating nature as close as possible, you have these natural forest stands after the years that they grow.
And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of Around the World. This is Kabir Naqvi signing off. Nuanced perspectives and contextualized news continues on the other side. Don't go anywhere. News9 big coverage of 5 assembly polls. Mandate 2023. Hamas attacks Israel. Israel Defense Forces strike back at Hamas. As the war unfolds, watch the comprehensive coverage of the Israel war only on News9 Plus. To watch the full story, download the app now.
Israel is a very important IT-based country.
TCS or Infosys or Wipro have a few hundreds of employees based out of Israel.
More than 500 multinational organizations, including Intel, Google, and Microsoft, have their offices in Israel. And this war is not sustainable for them.
Israel is the market leader when it comes to the global technology sector in cybersecurity.
Employees of global multinationals like Intel, Microsoft, Google, who have a much larger presence out there, what they will be looking at is actually moving some of those headcounts